We're going to now hear from the not-for-profit sector. We're going to hear from Reverend Peter Sandeman. Peter's the CEO of Anglicare, has a long history of working for social and economic development in South Australia. He's worked in senior exec positions in state government, disability services, primary health, as a Director of the Office of North, and in the whole of government capacity and Director of Case Management in the Department of Trade and Economic Development. I'm sure many of you have worked with Peter over the years in many different capacities. Peter's a member of the Australian Institute of Company Directors, is a deacon of the Anglican Diocese of Adelaide, Wallachra and the Murray. And in June 2015, Peter was appointed a professorial fellow in the Faculty of Social and Behavioural Sciences of the Flinders University of South Australia. So well done, Peter. Peter's going to give us a perspective on disrupting the silos from the not-for-profit sector. So welcome, Peter.
Well, very many familiar faces, and so as I tell some anecdotes, some of you will understand it's my perception of some of those events in the past. I just want to really start with talking about the current regulatory framework as experienced by myself and my colleagues perhaps in the room, which I would characterise as complex, incoherent, without sufficient transparency and very costly to the not-for-profit sector. So current information and reporting requirements for funding and evaluation are often poorly designed and unduly burdensome. The short-term funding arrangements at times creates a disjointed and competitive environment between not-for-profits, which works against appropriate, well-designed service planning responses. However, I just want to give a recent example where I believe a collaborative process with a state government agency resulted in a far better outcome. Recently, we entered into a collaborative negotiated process with the Department of Correctional Services. Correctional Services had approached the market seeking service delivery options, which proceeded to a formal request for proposal followed by an interactive process. And it's that interactive process which we found very good. The preferred provider was decided through the submission of a best and final offer, so there's the financial accountability in place for Treasury, etc. And that endorsed the two parties entering into a negotiation process. And the subsequent partnering process with Correctional Services and Anglicare SA enabled a co-design process through which we shared information freely, had very robust discussions about what the department wanted and what we believed was possible. Should the facility have cars? Well, if they're going to have cars, this is how much it'll cost you. Oh, we don't want cars. That went round the block about 3 times. I'm not sure whether we ended up with cars or not, but that's the level of discussion that we came to. The room sizes in the facility, if you build it this size, this is how much it's going to cost you. Oh, there are building regulations which we're required to adhere to, even though the department wasn't. So you can't build cells. So we came up with a building and a service model delivery which met the needs of both parties and, most importantly, the client group. And the final solution, I believe, was best value for both parties. And the bail hostel at Dale Street, Port Adelaide, was announced by Minister Piccolo and myself yesterday in a joint press conference. And again, that's a partnership that is fairly unusual. Usually ministers make the announcement and the service provider puts out a press release. Subsequently, we did it jointly, negotiated the whole thing, and it was a symbol of the collaboration, which I believe is a new high point in my experience of the tendering process, the procurement process operated by the state government. So that's a good news story there, but I just very quickly in the short time I've got available, and I'm going to wander off the reservation into some of my previous state government roles, but the biggest challenge facing the not-for-profit sector today is individualised funding. Now, most of people from the not-for-profit sector will be very well versed in this, but perhaps some public servants may not be. So the latest means to reduce costs, to improve quality and to improve outcomes is the new emphasis on user choice through individualised funding of clients. I'd argue it's the disruptive equivalent of the advent of solar power storage systems to the electricity generation and transmission silos. So it really is, I believe, a potential silo-busting innovation by the federal government. What we used to know as voucher schemes, when the economists first dared to suggest them, are now here and are clearly the major disruptors to the cosy block grant world, and not just to traditional providers like Anglicare and our grateful consumers, that is, consumers from the pre-baby boom generation. The baby boomers are going to be a little rougher on providers. It really is inverting the pyramid. The consumers have the money, we have to sell ourselves to the consumer, as opposed to the old system where we had the money and consumers had to apply to us for the money. And I also suggest that government silos may well be busted by this new approach. Both the consumer-directed care, CDC, arrangements for community aged care, and the National Disability Insurance Scheme, NDIS, arrangement of funding for support for people with a disability, are at various stages of implementation. So a couple of observations from a provider attempting to anticipate and meet this new chaos before the dust settles on a new world order. Individual choice is both a great boon to those traditionally robbed of autonomy, and it's also a means of enabling market efficiency, reduced costs, increased choice, and hopefully much better tailored solutions to individuals and their families. Information, however, is by far the best guarantee that market failure won't impede the competition for best value at lowest cost. But information is limited. The articulate, intelligent and well-informed will do very well, and the challenge will be to make key information available to everyone. The growth of the intermediary of brokers arranging care for a price will cater to the less advantaged, but sufficient safeguards will be required, as with financial advisors. And we're already seeing a new industry grow, particularly in the aged care area. Traditional silos may crumble or become porous as mainstream agencies compete for the disability dollar, and entitlement to services is replaced by fee for previously mainstream free services, unless access is guaranteed by negotiations before the floodgates open. It may already be too late. Now, a pot of funds around each individual may entice silos to work together to access that funding. It's similar at the individual level to Tony Blair's social exclusion wide but shallow pool of funds, which was available for departments to compete for on the basis of collaboration. And I think that's one of the better innovations in that whole social inclusion era that we seem to have passed through and beyond now. A couple of key challenges. Obviously, the industrial landscape is unable to cope with the degree of choice expected in the new world, and loss-leading aggregation by large international providers may ultimately reduce choice to standardised options. How this unfolds over the next 10 years is going to be fascinating. The role of government in quasi-market arrangements, where the assumption underlying these arrangements is that government is out of service provision. What is then the role of state governments? Some in Disability SA would like to continue to participate as a provider. I'm not sure that state governments as a whole are happy with that across the country. And the other issue really is, are we talking about one market or many markets with different conditions? And if you look at the CDC and NDIS arrangements for those organisations that go across both, the markets look as though they're going to be very different. CDC is attached to the Department of Health and Ageing federally, and the NDIS is of course attached to the DSS department. And they may go in very different directions. As for Anglicare, we're acquiring skills and experience for the commercial, and I'm sure my colleagues are as well, skills and experience for the commercial world that we previously did not require. Our challenge is to remain true to our values and beliefs while becoming much more savvy. We'll probably survive and do well, or maybe not. The UK experience was a marked decline in the not-for-profit sector. you may not regard this as much of a loss. However, some other changes are also likely. Smaller agencies will have to consolidate, and with that, a lot of specialist, different and very effective services will not have the scale to operate in the wider market. Now, to partially help overcome this loss of key services and specialised knowledge, Anglicare is actively engaged in partnering with smaller NGOs. And in that area, integrity is all. And we've managed to engage Ian to help us with some of that partnering, because you really do need to have a resistance to the inclination to take over rather than to partner. Unless we partner well, in the individualised market, collaboration is replaced by competition. Collaboration becomes subcontracting. We'll still work together, but for our share of the funding, thank you very much. For the very disadvantaged groups of clients we serve, who often require specialised supports from across sectors and around silos, the standard individualised package of funds may not be sufficient. Previous silo-busting efforts did not revolve around individual funding, but really cajoling collaboration, as we just heard in the previous example, or funds held and controlled by service agencies. In the future, we'll have to pay for it. Collaboration will be on a cost basis under individualised funding. So, for example, if people undergoing domestic violence, where a bag of money was attached to each of them, you'll find that services that were previously accessed for free will become fee-for-service arrangements, which I'd suggest is not a good outcome. If those funds now all belong to the individuals, how can they be shared with another person in greater need? The shifting around of aggregated funds has in the past permitted a degree of cross-subsidy, collaboration and innovation. The Minister, in her presentation, reminded of my days with the Office of the North. Now, I was able to assemble the Office of the North from funds from two very innovative CEOs who have since passed on to greater things, Tim O'Loughlin and Jim Birch. So the Office of the North was funded from transport and health, which is not a usual combination, but both CEOs saw outcomes in the northern suburbs that would serve their particular agencies and government as a whole. The Minister pointed out the impact of vertical accountability, and where the Westminster system drags ministers and departments apart, sometimes to the advantage of NGOs, but often not. The overall impact is to diminish the impact of government. I worked there to 4 ministers, and one of the ministers took me aside one day and said, "Peter, I know we have to work together, collaboration, complex problems, wicked problems, we need a whole of government solutions, but Peter, if we're working together, how do I take the credit?" And I thought to myself, I'm in deep shit here. So collaboration, joined up government entities can often be vulnerable, and the offices of the North, South, Port Augusta, I think that was us, all disappeared when we needed to find a way of plugging a black hole in planning one year, and the offices were defunded in that budget. I would argue that in order to enable collaboration and innovation across agencies, to enable agencies to adopt a population approach, as illustrated by Fran's presentation, working in primary prevention, in what we now call collective impact within communities and groups, and indeed within families, we need to have a bucket of money that isn't individualised. We need to retain some funds so that whole of community-based approaches to dealing with issues, rather than dealing with them on an individual basis, we need to retain funding in block grants. The answer is to retain a proportion of block funding to better enable collaboration and joint approaches, while utilising individual funding where markets will provide greater choice and efficiency. While the Commonwealth is heading towards individual funding, The state government hasn't ventured too far down that track. The trick will be to combine both approaches so that we can have individual funding so that for those services where individuals can tailor their own supports and there can be accountability to them, but also population approaches which require a degree of aggregation of funds and working across silos. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. And now we'll move to our final speaker of the morning, and that's Arman Abrahimzadeh. Now, Arman migrated to Australia with his immediate family in 1997 at the age of 10. He graduated from the Louis Leybourne Smith School of Architecture and Design at the Uni SA in 2010 and currently runs his own design and construction firm. Following the death of his mother at the hands of his father in March 2010, Arman has become a passionate advocate for better policies, procedures and legislation to protect women and their children. He's now a White Ribbon Ambassador, a member of the Adelaide White Ribbon Breakfast Committee and a founding member of the Zara Foundation Australia, established in the honour of his mother. He's also a board member for Educating to End Violence Incorporated, which is a not-for-profit organisation educating to promote the prevention or control of behaviour that is harmful or abusive to others. Arman will talk to us today about the need for collaboration as a safety net to catch those that fall through the system. So, welcome, Arman. Very pleased to have you here today.
Well, first and foremost, I'd like to thank the organisers for having me here today. I've listened to a lot of advanced presentations, and I feel that mine is going to be, I guess, back to the basics and fundamentals. So before I get into my presentation, what I would like to do is make everyone look silly just like me. So what I'll do is I'll get you guys to get your, take your index finger up. With your other hand, have a bit of a play around with it. Have a bit of a feel of it. You can break it if you really want to, but don't break anything. Just take it easy, okay? Now, what I'll do, get 4 fingers, have a bit of a play around with that. You might be able to cause some damage, but it's a little bit more steady. Okay, next step, make a fist. Try to do some damage to this. Not going to happen, is it? There's a message at the end, so bear with me. Now, I don't want to stand here and sound like I'm someone presenting at the APEC Summit, because that's not who I am and that's not what I do. I do work in the design and construction sector, and the work that I do in the, I guess, the not-for-profit sector or the DV sector is all on a voluntary basis. And unfortunately, it's due to my own history and background, and I'll get into that further in a minute. But I guess if I was to start, I would say, what do you do when you're facing bad economic climate? What do we do as a society when the economy takes a turn for the worse? We try to seek backup options, look at our counterpartners, explore different opportunities, and even sometimes educate ourselves in a different field. These options would usually be available to those who are fortunate enough to take them. But there are those who don't have too many options. Let me use an example. A family of 4, a mother and 3 children, live in an abusive home in search of safety and shelter. They have no family or friends they can trust. The only thing that keeps this family safe is their car. So they basically become homeless and isolated. This was my family's story when we fled our family home. And unfortunately, this is the story of many families out there experiencing similar abuse and facing similar fears. It was the effort and hard work of many different organisations that helped us out of that situation and made us see the light at the end of the tunnel. There was a variety of organisations that worked hand in hand to save one family out of turmoil. This is what collaboration can achieve, and we have adopted this approach at Zara Foundation Australia. The Zara Foundation, named in my mother's honour, has been set up to assist those whose situation we were in when we fled our family home. The Foundation aims to assist in 2 different ways. by providing small grants for families in need to cover everyday expenses such as food, clothing, linen, and the like. The Zara Foundation will also provide economic empowerment programs for women, including financial literacy skills and accredited training, which creates pathways to further education, training, and employment. We plan to deliver these programs statewide and also via an online interactive webinar platform to make learning accessible to women who are socially and geographically isolated. The Foundation's relationship with the DV sector is important, as we are essentially serving the same clients. Our partnership with businesses is essential, not only for our growth, but the quality of programs and the assistance we offer our clients. Our alliance with all the different sectors, be it not-for-profit, government, or corporate, will provide some assurance to those who have lost all hope. We will engage the community and the corporate sector to be part of the solution to addressing violence against women. It is a grand and yet simple ambition. Grand in its overarching and determined drive to help all women achieve their potential. Simple in its basic desire to let and assist women be their best. For victims of domestic violence, this is crucial to their survival. And if I was to throw something a little bit more personal out there, I would say that teamwork is what kept me and my family alive for over 20 years that we lived through all the abuse and violence. If it wasn't for teamwork, if myself, my sisters and my mum didn't work together, there's a chance that I may not be here, and my sisters wouldn't have been here either. But also, I must say that after we fled our home, we continued to keep that collaboration going. But this time, it was us and SAPOL and the not-for-profit sector, Central Domestic Violence Service, and also the law firms who were helping us with our family court matters. So that teamwork continued right through. And if I was to, I guess, go back to that funny hand gesture, this represents me as an individual. This is you as an individual. This is a small group. And this can do some damage. This is the entire room here. So I would say this, even though it starts with this, can save lives. So do what you do. Thank you very much.